My bad guys, well, it might not necessarily even be bad guys because they think they're doing the right thing, and they might actually be.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Matthew Betley.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Author Stories. You know, we're quickly approaching 400 episodes. It blows my mind to look back and think about the shows that we've been able to do, and looking at the calendar at the shows that we have scheduled. Really phenomenal stuff coming up. It's amazing to me sometimes to think about the amount of people that we have not talked to yet on the show. And Dawn keeps scheduling excellent authors and from every genre just about every day. So thank you for tuning in and listening. And just because we're about to hit 400 episodes does not mean we're slowing down anytime soon. So be sure to go over to hankgarner.com and subscribe to the show. There's handy links in the sidebar where you can subscribe on your favorite podcast app, on your phone, on your computer, wherever you do it. You can find links there. You also find us on YouTube. There's a link in the sidebar as well. I'd like to thank some sponsors who faithfully support the show and allow us to do what we do. One of those is Scott Woodley from marlowemoss.net. Scott is an excellent editor, and authors, what you don't know can hurt you. A lot of times we think that you can just do a cursory read over and then hit that publish button. I can tell you from experience that even, having proofreaders and, going over it yourself, things still fall through the cracks no matter how attentive to details you are. That's why you need an editor who can come in and give you that other set of eyes and who understands the story process to help you make your story the best it can be. At marlowemoss.net, Scott will give you a free sample edit, and he can show you how he can help your story be the best it can be. You can go to marlowemoss.net today, and you can read some testimonials and see how he can help you turn your sentences into inspired sentences and polished paragraphs for print-worthy books. He has competitive rates and always delivers on time. He offers a full range of editorial and ghostwriting services to self-published and traditionally published authors. Turn your ideas into words and see your dreams become books. marlowemoss.net. Also, I'd like to thank Richard Thomas for sponsoring the show. Richard has an online fiction writers course, the University of Richard. And there's a link in the show notes. There's a banner there where you can click on and you can see the course guide. Lots and lots of classes coming up. He can help teach you to be the best writer you can be. There's classes coming up for the 2018 and 2019 season, like short story mechanics, writing flash fiction, contemporary dark fiction, advanced creative writing workshops, how to write a novel in a year, lots and lots of stuff from a very prolific and excellent writer, Richard Thomas, teaching you how to be the best writer you can be. It's the University of Richard. There's a link in the show notes. I'd also like to tell you about a new sponsor, George Kramer, and his new book, Blind to Blood. Ben Bergstall had a unique job. He was a tissue procurement specialist. When someone died, he would surgically remove people's body parts for donation. He really enjoyed doing it. So much so, when an anonymous email asked him to consider recovering people's body parts on the side, he was more than happy to oblige. The trouble was Ben sought out live people to fulfill his clandestine clients' needs. Read all about Ben's exploits in this riveting book that delves into tissue procurement, Blind to Blood by George Kramer. Pick up your copy today on Amazon and find out why people are saying this is an intense page turner, that they are also fascinated by digging into the mind of Ben and finding out how he works. If you would like to see a look into the darker side of humanity, pick up Blind to Blood, the riveting new page-turner by George Kramer. As always, stay tuned at the end of the show for an audiobook clip from our good friend Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. By the way, Richard is going to be my guest on episode 400 coming up, and I have been reading the Jason Crane series book 4 before anybody else has, so I'm pretty excited about that. Excellent stuff coming up, and yeah, I think you're going to love it. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Matthew Betley on the show with me today. Matthew has a couple of brand new books out. His newest hardback release is called Field of Valor. It's going to be available in just a couple of weeks, but the mass market paperback of Oath of Honor, his tremendous book, political thriller, is out now, and you can run out and grab the second of the Logan West thrillers. Welcome to the show, Matthew.
Thanks, Hank. I'm happy to be here.
Matthew, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, so for me, it was much later in life. For readers and fans who have followed me or the series, most people know that I am a former Marine officer and a recovering alcoholic who just celebrated 9 years of sobriety.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I actually speak publicly about it. I'm very open about it. I'm always hoping that if I speak about it, then maybe it'll resonate with somebody who's struggling with it the same way that I did. So for me, I never wanted to be a writer. I have no degree in English. I have no master's of fine arts in creative writing. I was sober for 6 months in 2009. I was on vacation with my wife, and I was reading a book that had been recommended by Stephen King as this high-octane international thriller, and it bored me so badly that I actually got viscerally angry and turned to my wife and said, I can do a better job than this. And that was literally the seed that planted in my mind. I obsessed about it for a full year, and it was in August of 2010 that I finally sat down, wrote a 5-year plan on a whiteboard for real, and then I wrote the first draft of Overwatch over the next 18 months. And Here we are today.
Okay, so there's so much to I hate the word unpack there, but there's a lot to unpack there. Well, first off, before we dig into your 5-year plan, were you a bookish kid growing up?
I was. I grew up reading, I also just turned 46, so I grew up reading Tom Clancy, Stephen King, Jonathan Irving, Don Pendleton's Mac Bolan series for readers who are my age or older who remember those action thrillers. So I did. I was a huge reader as a child.
Well, I have a theory, and listeners are sick of hearing it, I'm sure, but I believe that that storytellers are born and writers are made. And it's always interesting to me to hear what kinds of things people read in their formative years, because a lot of those themes resurface when we become writers ourselves. And I love that you're a Clancy fan. When I read Oath of Honor, I totally got that bear and dragon kind of feel. And your characters are very Clancy-esque, and I mean that in the best possible compliment. Was your family, did you come from a line of storytellers?
No.
Any over the top characters in your family?
Well, I come from a long line of overachievers, especially on my father's side. My grandfather, I heard a story once that he fought Joe Louis in 1932 in a Golden Gloves amateur bout and lost. My father played on the PGA Tour on and off from 61 to 63, and my father and grandfather were both businessmen. So, and my mom was a library scientist with a master's from Rutgers. So who knows where I adopted it, but or picked up the penchant for writing. I'm sure I'm sure that I learned my grammar skills from my mom. That is one thing that is without question.
You're a Marine, correct?
I am.
I'm sorry, you are a Marine.
Well, you know what they say: once a Marine, always
Yes.
a Marine, and it's never ex-Marine; it's always former Marine. But yes, I spent 10 years as an officer in the Marine Corps, and it's kind of amusing because I almost went to law school, but instead ended up going off to the Marine Corps. Had I gone to law school, I doubt we'd even be having this conversation today.
So you almost joined the dark side. But
I did, and this is a true story of how I chose the Marine Corps. At the time, I had just won a state title in martial arts. This must have been in 1998, and I was getting ready to take the LSAT, which is the entrance exam for law school. My pre-scores, I was testing in like the 94th percentile, and I had really I was looking at top 10 law schools. I was actually the captain of my mock trial team in college, and we came in 11th in the country. After I graduated Miami of Ohio, they went on to actually win several national championships. But I'm a big movie buff. I've been going to the movies ever since I was a little kid, which is why my style of writing is so visual. And I was in a movie theater, and I stopped somebody from getting beaten up, and I was the only person out of 400 who intervened. And as a result, and the story is much longer than that, but that's the bottom line. As a result, the next day I decided I needed to do something more proactive with my life, and I gave up law school, and I, no kidding, called the officer selection office in Columbus, Ohio, I think that following Monday, and here we are.
What happened just past 9/11?
Oh, well, when 9/11 happened, I was already in the Marine Corps. I was a first lieutenant, I believe, and I had command of a scout sniper platoon down at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. In fact, when 9/11 occurred, I mean, like the moment, I was in what they call the butt area of the rifle range pulling targets. And I'll never forget that one of the safety officers came over the loudspeakers and said, it was probably like 9:45, maybe 10:00, and he said, I just want to inform you that the Twin Towers have been attacked and a plane just flew into the Pentagon. We are on standby. And I remember my corpsman, my corpsman, who later became a Navy SEAL, his father was a colonel in the Marine Corps at the Pentagon, so he was freaking out. His father ultimately was okay, but I'll never forget that day because my scout sniper platoon actually went on to be the QRF, the Quick Reaction Force, for the country for the next 30 days. We were on strip alert, and we actually thought we were going to be flying to Afghanistan, any day. We ended up not going to Afghanistan. We ended up preparing in California and then Norway for a different deployment, but it was a crazy time for sure. And I never even saw, what's crazy about that day is we had to stay at Stone Bay Rifle Range until that evening, and I didn't even see the first footage until it must have been like 19:30 that night, and that was in the battalion CP.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did I know this is probably a dumb question, but just indulge me if you will. Being deployed in a situation like that, as you are a thriller writer now, do you ever look back on that time and to kind of pull from the well of emotion or tension? Does that stuff still affect you now as a writer?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Overwatch, that flashback sequence to the ambush at an insurgent compound in Fallujah in 2004 in the book, I was in Fallujah from 06 to 07 at Camp Fallujah, and a lot of the things in there are drawn straight from my experience. Not me going out and doing that. I always like to remind people that while I had this tactical background, I was a weapons instructor, I commanded a scout sniper platoon, I was not running and gunning like Logan West does. I write fiction, and I always remind people that even though the characters feel very relatable, the action is authentic, the way the physics of the actions unfolds, I'm still writing to entertain and tell a story.
Right. Well, let's fast forward a little bit to that fateful day where you wrote out a 5-year writing plan on a whiteboard. What was because you had never done this before. So what was what were your initial thoughts after reading that book and telling your wife, oh, I can do better than this? And looking back on that now, what do you think? Some of that early writing before you're ever published and before anybody, but, maybe your spouse knows that you're actually even attempting this. Those are some of the best days because you don't know what you can't do at that point. There's lots of disappointment that comes after that, but those are precious days. Tell us a little bit about what was going through your mind and, was John Quick in those original plans and Logan West? What were you thinking then?
Oh no! In fact, Overwatch, as was published, is 99% the way it was written in the first draft.
Amazing.
Yeah. In fact, I like to say that I'm very proud of the fact that I've written 3 novels, and there have been like minor tweaks here and there, but I've never had a single page cut out of my books.
That's amazing.
And so I'm very fortunate. I like to make sure that my manuscripts are as polished as possible when I turn them in. And I also am one of those authors that I love the editing process because every opportunity where I can make something just slightly better, to me, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Were you aware of that in the first writing? Were you aware that you needed to polish and that, were you aware of plot holes and things like that to steer away from?
I was. I'm a very intuitive writer. I knew exactly what I wanted to write before I started writing, and I just sat down and did it. I mean, it was literally that was my process. In fact, my writing process itself, I don't even feel like I'm a writer even today, and I'm working on my 4th book. I actually feel like I'm more of a scribe because I know the story. I see it playing out in my head. I literally see it. I hear the emotion. I hear the dialogue. I feel the emotion. And I'm listening to musical scores from, great epic action movies. And all I feel like I'm doing is transcribing what I'm seeing and feeling. And that's it.
As a writer, I feel the same exact way, Matthew, that and I'm not a very detailed outliner, but I like to kind of walk around with the story in my head for a while before I start writing, and then I'll make some notes, some kind of signpost along the way, if you will, just to make sure I'm staying on track. But for the most part, when I'm writing, the characters are just playing out the scenario in my head, and I'm like a newspaper reporter almost.
No, I agree. Now, I also don't outline at all. I could show you. I bought this leather-bound book in 2010,
yeah.
And for each of my novels, I have maybe 10 phrases just to outline that each sequence that I plan to do with each book, and that's it. Nice. I manage all this stuff in my head, believe it or not.
Well, growing up and reading thrillers and action adventure books, you talked about not having any formal writing training, but a lot of folks that I've talked to that have MFAs and all of that wind up at the end still as an unpublished writer that just has an MFA and has never written the thing that they wanted to. I think the best education for writing is reading, especially in the genre that you're passionate about. and then reading other genres that will help kind of stretch your writing a little bit so that you think about things differently, and then actually sitting down to write. That's how you learn to write.
Well, so this will throw you for a loop because I don't actually read my own genre. I read, other than reading Clancy as a kid, there is an author that I love, an Australian action writer named Matthew Riley, and I would say that his books, especially the pacing, had the greatest impact on me because you've read my books, you'll know that I have like a 60 or 70 page action sequence, and then there's a brief interlude, and then we're off to the next race. And because I want to draw the writer into my world so that the reader feels like he or she is literally right there with the characters. But yeah, I don't have honestly, I just don't have time right now. To actually read anything, sadly. I'm hoping that changes, especially now that once the movie goes into production.
What's the movie news that you have?
Oh, maybe you didn't see this, but we actually agreed to a worldwide franchise with Thunder Road Pictures.
Nice.
And I've got Braden Aftergood producing. Braden is an amazing, ambitious producer who did Hell or High Water, Wind River, Lone Survivor, Battleship, and Thunder Road is the same production company that put out the John Wick movies, Sicario, The Town. So their intent is to make a series of movies that's a combination of John Wick, Lone Survivor, and Sicario. And we literally just agreed to the deal, and we're hoping that production will begin within the next 18 months. They even named a screenwriter, and they're already beginning the adaptation of the first book, Overwatch, into the screenplay.
Heck yeah, that's awesome, man. Congratulations on that.
People think writing or getting a book published is difficult. We started the movie process actually in August of 2015, even before the first book was published. So I can't explain how laborious a process it is to even get to this place.
Oh yeah, and most of the folks you talk to will say, we optioned or we sold the option for film, but I'm just going to pretend that it's never going to happen because probably 90% never do, and probably 95% never get to the point where you are.
Well, and so what's fortunate and what I'm very, very happy about is that Thunder Road is a smaller production company. They only have maybe 45 or 50 projects, and every property they acquire, they actually usually make. So, I've talked to the producer a number of times. He also has a way of funding the budget, which is going to be big, and that he intends to make this movie. And so you're right, but what you're describing, and I've heard that happen, especially if you're with a big studio like MGM, Paramount, Universal, you can get lost in what's called development hell.
Right.
And I'm fairly confident that's not going to happen because the end goal is to get the movie made. Exactly.
Well, we're going to keep our fingers crossed, and it's amazing news that you're in the process where you are right now. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about your main characters. Tell me about John Quick and Logan West. Where did these guys come to you, and how is it for you writing these characters going forward in more and more books?
So I went with the old simple adage of write what you know. On a daily basically, Logan West and John Quick are the two sides of my personality. When I get upset, angry, I'm pretty much Logan West, but in a day-to-day basis, I'm John Quick. I am so self-deprecating. I am incredibly sarcastic. I've had a very serious life, so I do not take myself seriously. But I basically wrote my two sides of my personality into a series of thrillers. So it's actually pretty easy to write.
Well, I love that you say you're John Quick on a day-to-day basis because, and I mean this as the utmost compliment. Your books are full of adrenaline and kind of not let the reader go at any moment, but also a lot of smartassery, which I absolutely love.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. And in fact, that's exactly my intent because, again, I am trying to entertain the reader. I'm sure there are plenty of thrillers out there that are very technical. They can be dry. I'm trying to tell wildly entertaining stories that are still believable but have very relatable characters. I basically write what I would want to read.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about writing those action scenes, and you talked about having 60 or 70 page action scenes. How do you keep the reader engaged for that long, and knowing that a lot of people are not going to read 60 or 70 pages in one sitting. A lot of people may read in bed at night, 3 or 4 pages, each night, or some people may, grab a little bit on their lunch break or something like that. How do you keep the reader engaged, so that they still, every time they pick up the book, they fall right back into the action and they feel engaged?
Well, so the best feedback I've received, because I don't know how to keep them engaged. All I know is this is what I'm going to write, and I want to send the reader on a ride every single time. My books, like I said, they're broken up into various sequences. The best feedback I get as an author is when I hear from my readers that, "Hey Matt, thanks. I'm at work today and I'm tired because I didn't sleep." Or, "Hey Matt, I forgot to do something because I was reading your book." And I get that a lot. And to me, that's the best compliment I can get. I love depriving readers of sleep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, how many books do you have planned for these guys?
Well, so right now I'm working on the 4th book. I already have 2 more planned in my head. There are 2 characters in Oath of Honor that people love, Amira Cerrone and Cole Matthews, and I am toying with an origin story for Amira Cerrone, which I like a lot, the way I have it played out in my head. So we'll see. I get a lot of feedback that everyone absolutely loves Amira, and that she deserves her own series. I'm not sure I'd go that far because she is now part of my fictional task force, but I love writing that character, and she's definitely sticking around for at least a little bit.
I love that. As you're moving this series forward, do you ever sit and scratch your head and think, what am I going to put these people up to next?
No, in fact, like I said, I have tons of ideas of where I'd like to take them. And throughout each book, it's also important to me is in the writing a series in the thriller genre, there are a few authors have said the trick is to, like a few huge authors that I've talked to have said, the trick is to write it different but the same every time. I agree with that to an extent, but I also want my characters evolving through every book. So there is something, the way that book 3 opens, that is going to send readers for a loop at the end of the prologue, because I want my characters evolving.
Well, and they have to, because as readers, and I understand that you want the same but different. I think as a reader, what I take from that is that when I pick up the book, I want to be able to jump right in and be familiar with the settings and the characters and their motivations. And I don't want to be taken, I don't want to be introduced to a brand new character that I thought I already knew. But at the same time, when I look back on me personally 5 years ago, I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. So we, as writers, have to leave room for our characters to grow and mature, to make mistakes, to become better, to become worse sometimes. That's part of the human journey. No,
I totally agree. Like I said, especially at 46, I'd like to think I'm slightly more mature than I used to be. I mean, it might be questionable, especially if you talk to my wife. But I definitely want the readers to feel the same way, that my characters are evolving. It's just we'll see how it goes. I have a lot of ideas. I definitely want to keep writing this series, especially with the movie, and because a movie takes so long to produce. Realistically, I wouldn't even expect to see it in theaters until, maybe early 2021, late 2020 at the earliest.
Right. I'm the same age as you, and I'm 46 as well. Do you think that these kinds of stories, do you think you could have written these kinds of stories when you were 25, or does the character development and maybe the intuition to understand where these scenarios are going, do you think those come with a little bit of maturity?
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't do anything at 25, no matter what it was. And this is why I talk about sobriety. for me, everything changed with sobriety. Once I finally realized I had had enough of that lifestyle, and I was, with my personality, I was a raging lunatic when I drank, and I was a weekend binge drinking alcoholic. I managed to stay sober during the week, every week, because I was still in the military and I wasn't going to jeopardize my career. Although I did get myself into trouble. I mean, that's undeniable. But the reality is that once I got sober, I got my head on straight, and because of the way I was, if I had kept on drinking, trust me, the world wouldn't know who I was. I'd either be dead, alone, miserable, unemployed, you name it. But instead I finally, sought help, and by the grace of God, here we are.
That's incredible. And I'm sure there's someone out there listening to this now that will take that to heart.
I hope so, because that's literally the most important thing I can ever talk about is that. Books are fantastic. I want to hit the New York Times. I want the movie deal. I want all that. But if my story can help somebody else realize that, hey, if this guy could get his head on straight, maybe I can too. Because there was a time where I never thought I would get out of that downward spiral. I just didn't. I could not envision getting sober.
And looking back on that now, what do you think about the Matthew that was back then?
What I think is that I was an arrogant jackass for many years of my life. The people who knew me when I was a lunatic and know me now, it's kind of funny. When you get sober, your mannerisms don't change. The way you speak doesn't change. I speak very quickly. I think quickly. It's just the way that I am. But my priorities changed. What was important to me then is obviously no longer what's important to me now. So people definitely noticed something. I actually had people 6 months after I got sober say, wow, like that huge weight that you used to carry around is gone. And it's true, because I was, liberated from that like psychological burden of being a barely functioning alcoholic.
Wow. What an incredible story. Books aside, every time I hear of someone that's gone through a personal transformation like that, I'm hats off to you. That much respect.
Oh, I appreciate that. And the thing is, to me, I'm just one of many.
Yeah. Before we go, Matthew, I want to ask you about writing thrillers, especially political thrillers like you do. And I've talked to Brad Thor and Kyle Mills, and we've had these conversations before. But when you're writing books that are so close to the pulse of world happenings and those of us that live in the U.S., when I read a book of yours, I'm like, wow, this could really happen. It may actually be happening. How do you write things and scenarios that are so close to true or could possibly happen? Are you constantly thinking about this, and how do you keep from going crazy looking at the world around you, knowing that stuff could go off the rails at any given time?
Well, I'll answer that this way, and it is, if anything happened in any of the thrillers that are written by like Brad Thor, Ben Coase, Brad Taylor, the world would have ended like a million times over. Right. I mean, the reality is that, yes, horrible things happen every day, especially on the geopolitical front. But the things that we write about, the way I describe it is, and what really motivates me is, I write these crazy things that might happen, but I respond to them. My characters respond to them the way that I would want our government to actually respond to a crisis, not the way that it actually does. I think I once heard Lee Child say on a late show that writing is wish fulfillment. So when you're reading one of my books, it's almost a utopian version of how I'd like to see our government, special forces, the military respond to this horrible threat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's perfectly put. Matthew, as an author who when that first book was published, and then when Oath of Honor came out, and people really started knowing who you are and started paying attention to you, like never before. When you're kind of thrust onto that stage as an author, are you surprised at the way readers react, or maybe the way people take what you say on social media and amplify it, and that it's kind of a crazy place now, especially when one day you're just Matthew Betley, citizen, and you're walking out to your mailbox, and then the next day you check Twitter and people are have opinions about things. Like, how do you navigate those waters in a social media type world now?
Well, I'm a very opinionated person. I know it's hard to believe. I'm also very extroverted, so I actually love social media. A few weeks ago, I decided to try and be somewhat apolitical, mainly because I just don't have the cycles in my day. And I posted a blog on my website, and I tweeted it out and put it on Facebook, explaining why I just don't have the cycles in my day to engage in the level of debate that somebody like Brad Thor does. I just don't have the time between family, work, writing, working out. It's just not possible. So, over the past year, I'm friends with a bunch of the writers at the Weekly Standard, which is a conservative political, periodical. And I posted a couple articles in their pages, one on the NFL kneeling controversy, one on the furlough that happened last fall, the very short one. But, I would love to engage more. It's just I just don't have the time. So I'm not shy about it in any way, shape, or form. I will say that I also don't want to be caustic and abrasive about the way I interact with people, because I'd like people who disagree with me politically to still read my books. But unfortunately, one of the dangers of social media is there's almost no moderation. It's like I used to say when I was drinking, I can't even spell moderation. There's no moderation in social media. You're either on one extreme or the other, which is kind of a sad state of affairs, but that's kind of where we are.
Right. So the Oath of Honor is, when people are listening to this, it's out now. In mass market paperback, and the cover's been reworked for the mass market paperback. It's gorgeous. These covers definitely let you know what the book is about, and they're just brilliantly done. But tell us about the new hardback coming out that's out in just a couple of weeks, and what can readers expect from both of these book releases?
Well, so if you pick up Oath of Honor, you'll know that Logan and John are now trying to reacquire a weapon that's been stolen from the U.S. And Oath of Honor involves the Russians, the North Koreans, the Sudanese, the Chinese. It's a whole cast of characters, but not in the typical way. They're not all involved. They're all not caricature villains. That's just not the way. They all have their own motivations for doing what they do. That's another thing that I try to avoid. I can't stand caricatures or stereotypical bad guys. And so my bad guys, it might not necessarily even be bad guys because they think they're doing the right thing, and they might actually be. I like to make things a little bit more complicated. So when Oath of Honor ends, Field of Valor picks up 6 months later. And it opens with a prologue that will just rock readers right from the beginning. I mean, literally, it will just rock people backwards from the get-go. And then I will say that Field of Valor is hands down the fastest rocket ship that I've written yet to date.
Awesome. Oh, Matthew, I can't wait for everybody to get both of these releases in their hands. And the first book, if you want to go back and really get in on the ground floor, is Overwatch. I highly recommend all of these books. You will be hooked for life. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for giving us Logan West and John Quick and all of the cast of characters. Where can people follow you online, Matthew?
On Twitter, I'm at Matthew Betley. Again, think of the car without the N. So I always tell people that. There's also a Matthew Betley Facebook fan page. And then there is, of course, MatthewBetley.com.
Excellent. Matthew, we wish you much success, and I hope that that we keep going onward and upward. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Hank. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
No use crying over spilled milk. Eliza hated that cliché. She'd grown up a cliché, her life a bowl of cherries, duck soup, easy as pie, child's play behind a white picket fence. Mother had been the Wyatt Earp of clichés, firing them off, quick draw. A rotten apple spoils the barrel. Smile and the world smiles with you. Every dog has his day. Children should be seen and not heard. She believed them all, particularly this last. Eliza obliged, preferring to wander the streets of Wytheville, Virginia, on her own lonesome terms. The divorce left Laura a spinster librarian, and one false step on icy stairs left her an invalid as well. The accident happened on New Year's Eve, 1950. Laura had just locked the doors of Wytheville Public Library. "We must make black-eyed peas tomorrow," Laura had been thinking, "with turnip greens." That ensured a lucky new year, and if you swept some money over your threshold, a prosperous one, too. She loved those old Southern traditions. She looked both ways, checking for Negroes, but turned to heel on the icy marble of the stairs and fell into the bushes below, breaking the long bones in both legs. Eliza had taken advantage of her mother's absence. She'd lost her virginity that same night. She'd swept Ron Partridge over her threshold, initiating her own beloved tradition. She was nursing a hangover, giddily reliving the event. But around 8:30 she realized that her mother had not come down to breakfast. She checked her mother's bedroom, found it empty, took the bus down to the library, climbed the high stairs, knocked hard on the library doors, and heard a groan below. Laura lay under the William Penn barberry bushes, below the yellow-trimmed windows of the non-fiction section. Her white stockings ran Jezebel red with blood. Sweat and melted snow had soaked her blouse, and her gray forehead blazed. The broken bones didn't kill Laura Merrick. She lay in the hospital, wheezing, her legs mortared up in casts. She had few visitors after the first week. Her church group was glad to fret over a poor thing for a day or two, but they trickled away when Laura had the bad manners to linger. On Valentine's Day, as her mother slept, Eliza drew big, sloppy hearts on her casts. Laura harumphed when she woke and insisted on keeping her legs hidden beneath blankets afterwards. But in late March, something miraculous happened. Laura's self-control dropped. She ranted at nurses, spit at doctors, swore like a Navy pilot dropping F-bombs on Hiroshima. She had dementia, the doctors said. Eliza decided that her mother had just stopped believing her own bullshit. The spells continued over the next 2 weeks, and Eliza enjoyed her mother's company for the first time. They swapped bawdy jokes, ogled the handsome interns, and chattered like best girlfriends late into the evening. They had long conversations, and Laura spoke her own mind in her own words about things that mattered to her. It broke Eliza's heart when the prim, condescending librarian returned. Laura hardly acknowledged anything that had passed between them. The clichés returned. You can't have your cake and eat it too. A leopard doesn't change its spots. Nothing is certain except death and taxes. This last proved true. On April 15th, Laura Merrick marked her Bible with a tongue depressor, set it on her nightstand, leaned back against the headboard, and coughed blood down the front of her nightdress. Eliza found her that way, dead as the proverbial doornail, and yes, the blood was thicker than water, just as her mother had always said. Much thicker than water, in fact, perhaps as thick as molasses in January.